Any further ado, I'd like to invite the first speaker of the Affirmative to begin the debate. Here. Oh, also, sorry, because I need the desk and I'm right-handed. I might be awkwardly not looking at you for most of the debate, but I am paying attention.
Starts in 3, 2, 1 now. Several pieces of setup. Firstly, about our model. I think when we say that we would significantly shift towards a much more repairability-oriented business model, this basically means that we're going to shift those components into something that is much more repairable. This looks like we don't need special tools for people to do repairments, and we don't need like special recharges or like chargers, etc., etc. And we don't need special earphones, right? Second, this also means that like Apple are going to do certain kinds of advertisements that is going to label themselves as they're very sustainable, they're going green, they're doing this green transition. And thirdly, I think this also means that Apple is going to ensure that by doing this green transition, this is not going to influence its functions. And I think this is our fiat to set up this model, and I think if outside are going to challenge this, they need to prove why this is likely to be true. Second piece of setup, what are the problems that Apple are in face of in the status quo? I think they're basically twofold. One is that Apple is already facing a super oversaturated market, which means that it is very hard for Apple to generate profit. Like a lot of users who like Apple already have certain kind of devices, which means that it is super hard for Apple to expand its market to have more users to begin with. Second problem is that Apple is criticized by a lot of people or like by a lot of countries for not going green. I think Apple is clearly losing its market in the status quo simply because of the fact that a lot of phone suppliers are going green because of the fact that a lot of countries have a lot of regulations to restrict them from getting into their market because they don't follow the environmental standards. Third thing about setup, about Apple's interest. I think the baseline claim here is that Apple wants to generate profit. This means two things. One, Apple has a lot of incentive to expand its market, to enter into more new markets, to bring more consumers. Second is that Apple has the incentive to not lose its current followers, its current customers. Okay, final thing about setup. Okay, I think in the status quo, as it is already implied in the info slide, going green is the trend. The info slide tells us that this is a movement about like right to repair, advocating for products to be designed for ease of repair by both owners and independent shops. Which means that firstly, going green is already the trend in the status quo. Sustainability is something that both individuals and politicians have incentive to care about. I think this is true in several ways because we see a lot of green parties are in the rise in the status quo. A lot of politicians super care about environmental issues, and there are a lot of environmental activists existing in the status quo. Second thing in the status quo, I think it is just intuitive that people hate bringing 2 or 3 chargers a day. People hate bringing 2 or 3 pairs of earphones a day, right? Okay, finally, I want to be clear about this. I think on both sides, we have the very same impact, and this is the premise impact, that is the larger user base. I think like Apple want to have larger user base, and we would argue this is the premise of every impact that is going to happen in this debate. For example, when you have larger user base, this just means that you are going to have more money, more profit to begin with. And this is the premise of a lot of downstream impacts, like more innovation and more development and better practices from the companies towards its employees, right? Okay, cool. With this in mind, 2 arguments. Firstly, why it is super effective for Apple to expand its own market to bring more new users. Second argument, why Apple don't lose its current users. First argument, 2 pieces of framing on top. As I have already explained, why going green is the general trend, which means that it largely influences the user's consuming habits when it comes to they selecting which kind of phone, which type of phone that you're going to use. So this means like, second piece of framing. This is a signal effect, right? Because as I have already said in the setup, Apple is going to label themselves as sustainable. This means this signal effect is going to be effective to begin with. With this in mind, 3 reasons why this is the very effective strategy to expand its market. Firstly, in terms of its suppliers, I think when Apple is changing themselves towards this repairability-oriented business model, this means that they actually get more downstream suppliers to choose from, because you're going to use the standard components. You don't use the non-standard components. You don't need to outsource your production into only one supplier or very few suppliers. But comparatively, you get more choices on our side. You get more downstream suppliers, like more upstream suppliers to choose from. For example, you don't need to only outsource to Foxconn. You can also outsource to a lot of other companies. And we will argue, when this happens, this generally means that because of the competition incentive, this means that you get A, better suppliers to choose from, and B, simply more choices, and this means that maybe the production cost is going to be much lower. Secondly, when you are going to, I think this means that on our side, Apple is much more environmental friendly. So this means that it's very likely for them to enter new markets simply because of the fact that in Europe, a lot of countries restrict Apple to come into their market because of the regulations in terms of importing and exporting, right? Because Apple don't follow certain kind of environmental standards, this just prohibits them from entering into the market to begin with. But comparatively on our side, this problem is solved. Second layer of analysis in terms of individual buyers. I think individual buyers get a lot of benefits in this whole process. Firstly, their life is just much easier. They don't need to carry 2 or 3 chargers every day. And also, this means that they're going to have relatively low cost when they need to repair their phones, when they need to repair their pads, right? Because you don't need to go to that dedicated repairman store to do the repairment. You can just maybe like repair it by yourself, and you can just like go to some other kind of stores, right? Secondly, I think individuals are much more, they are going to be much more buy-in for individual buyers, simply because of the fact that people generally care about environmental issues a lot, and this largely influences their consuming habits, which means that when Apple label themselves as sustainable, this creates huge buy-in on our side. This just directly leads to more people are going to choose to buy iPhones, choose to buy Apple products in the first place. Third layer of analysis in terms of investment. We would argue on our side, when Apple is doing this transition, this is much more likely for Apple to get more investment to begin with. I think in the status quo, a lot of investors actually have incentive to focus on environmental issues. I think this is directly the reason why a lot of like green products actually get investment. This means A, those investors who originally invest in Apple don't get shifted away, because the reason why they invest in Apple is they like see some kinds of potentials in the whole like ecosystem or environment of Apple products. And this is also the reason why they are going to continuously invest on our side. But B, you actually bring more investors who love to invest in green products, right? This is the extra amount of investment that is going to be generated on our side. All of these 3 layers proves to you this is a super effective way for Apple to expand their own market. As I have already said, this is super in alignment with Apple's interest. And all the downstream impacts looks like when you get more user base, this leads to more profit, and more profit generally means that you get better level of development because you have the money to do so. This also means that you get more innovation because you have the money to support your innovations, right? And this also means that companies are going to have better practices towards its own employees, because companies can pay those employees higher wages or like give them better environmental working conditions. Second argument, why you don't lose your current users? I've already hinted in my last argument. Oh, okay, yeah, this part will be done by my partner. Based on that, very proud to stand on affirmative side.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now look at the first negative sticker in the case of side neg. Here.
Side Affirmative does not cover in their interests of Apple is that they deliberately market themselves as some form of luxury brand, and they like literally all of their decisions factor into the fact that they have such exclusive products that are able to offer a suite of access to individuals that purchase their products. I think when the illusion is shattered, when they start making products more easily, like to some extent by making it considerably easier for products to get repaired, I think Side Affirmative does not necessarily grasp how that necessarily means it's harder for Apple to generate as much profit, considering how their market, like market share or how they are able to generate profit under status quo. So, a few things in characterization, and then I'll engage with Side Affirmative and then provide some substantive. Okay, so I think it's really important to note that firstly, Apple is probably one of the biggest companies. It is one of the biggest companies in the world. Literally, one of the first $1 trillion companies at all. And we think that the big thing with Apple's products, despite the fact that they are possibly seen as ineffective to people that buy them, or they seem to have short lives, but the fact that people continually go back and buy a new iPhone when it gets released, despite the fact that their current iPhone is completely functional, or they continue to buy Apple cords to charge their phones, despite the fact that they have terrible lives and they they break quite easily, they fray, they are generally ineffective products. I think because Apple is able to generate promote such an image to its consumers and create some degree of loyalty with them, I don't think it's necessarily true, like Side Affirmative wants to push, that Apple consumers necessarily care about the environmental impact of their consumerism when they want to buy a brand new phone every year, or a brand new laptop every 3 years, or buy 5 cables to charge their phone within the span of the lifetime of one individual phone, because they keep breaking. So I don't think that Apple consumers are necessarily as environmentally conscious as Side Affirmative does want to push off. So I think the number of consumers that they claim to lose based on that fact is actually minimized under that side of the case at first. And we think that because Apple firstly sells so many products, I think that also emboldens the narrative of consumers buying multiple products when they do engage with Apple. I think, and there's also the other benefit of whenever consumers walk into Apple stores to get their products fixed or things like that, or book a Genius appointment or whatever, they have to physically go into the store and they have to they typically take in all of the products that are around them. And I think that is crucial to the Apple model, that they are always being immersed in the Apple ideal of all of these products coexisting within one area. So I think that is particularly important for Apple to continue to be able to remain profitable and be as profitable as possible. I don't think you get that under Side Affirmative. So generally on interests, we think Side Affirmative is correct in telling us that Apple cares about generating profit, not only for the company's own expansion, but also to return that to shareholders. I think Apple also cares about being competitive. And thirdly, we think that the marketing of the brand is particularly important. And we don't think that necessarily extends to being seen as green. We think it matters considerably more to be seen as a luxury brand. And I think Apple has done a lot to curate that image, whether that's the massive videos, the big events when they release a new product, things like that. Not many brands do things like that, and I think Apple was kind of a pioneer in ensuring that they were able to create that kind of image within the public eye of what their business looks like. I don't think that making Apple seem just like every other phone on the market is necessarily consistent with it being also viewed as a luxury product. And I think also sometimes cost is a factor as to whether or not something is deemed as a luxury product as well. Okay, so why do we think, substantive? 2 points for substantive. Firstly, why the status quo kind of meets these interests, and I don't know, I can't remember my other left. I'll get to it later. Okay, so firstly, on what do we think the status quo is? So we think that most Apple products are generally quite breakable to an extent, and we think that a lot of breakage in these in products is usually due to individuals and how they use them. And we think that all people are always going to want the most recent product, and that's why they tend to go back to Apple every year, even to upgrade programs, to trade in phones, or just to buy the brand new tech when it comes out. And we think that generally people, irrespective of the environmental impact, are always going to be appreciative of things like the flashiness of the design, or even the simplicity of the design to some extent, because it's something that they might not necessarily be able to get through other competitors, right? So why do we think that the status quo is better? We think firstly, because people are more likely to upgrade their products more frequently, or when things break, or just generally. We think that means there is always going to be more turnover for Apple. We think that happens even less when phones are more more easily repaired. So I think that profit is considerably down. Apple is actively sending its market away to other people to repair their products and maybe keep them alive for longer periods of time. Secondly, within this, we think that people are more inclined to buy accessories and other smaller purchases from Apple when they are buying products directly from Apple. We think that if they buy that's less likely to occur when they aren't buying new phones. I think I don't know, I think it's very material. I buy a new phone case every single time I get a new phone. I think that's something that a lot of people do, right? I think thirdly, because people are coming into the stores for repair, they I kind of already said that already anyway. Why don't they go elsewhere? I think people have an inherent fear under status quo that their phone is going to become faulty when they get someone else to repair it. And I think that ensures that they go back to Apple to get it repaired if they seek a repair. And we think that if anything, it's better for the Apple market if they then opt out of getting that repair and instead just decide to buy a new product entirely instead. Because if anything, that becomes 10 times more profitable. Okay, what happens inside Affirmative as well? I think generally, first to say, there are less purchases. People are not buying products as frequently, usually because they are extending the life considerably further than Apple designed it for. I think with iOS updates, it makes it very clear that Apple does not want products to last for a long period of time, because as you upgrade the software on your phone, it becomes literally impossible to use depending on the capacity of your phone. I think that is very clear within the Apple mantra that your phone has a certain shelf life, throw it out. So I think secondly, this shift is particularly costly. I think just changing literally how factories operate to retrain workers to some extent to make them changing the entire process in assembling products, I think that's quite costly. I think that's always going to be quite costly, and I think initially it's going to be take considerably longer to generate product. I think just generally product margins as a result of all of these factors decreases considerably. Okay, so why do people not factor in the breakage of their products frequently? I think firstly, that's usually just not a factor. I think people care more about the brand than whether or not they see the product as being faulty or not. And I think that when you have the more products that you have from the Apple brand, that's probably going to be considerably less of a factor. And I think people also just have this illusion that when they buy screen protectors or phone cases, that also extends the life, but also that ends up being considerably more profitable for Apple. I think because we are able to generate greater degree of profit for both Apple and its shareholders, we are able to maintain the fact that we are a luxury brand, and because we are able to keep more consumers coming back to us consistently, that is why we win this race.
Thank you very much for that speech. From our second Apple communication side, Affirmative. Here. You wouldn't know it's recording, right?
Yeah.
conceded that Apple is currently an industry leader when it comes to developing iPhones. They were the first trillion-dollar tech company, and they've still got a huge fanatic fan base of people who continue buying their phones. So why has their business model been so successful thus far? It's because the consistent re-releases of exclusive iPhones that you need to rebuy because your current model from a year ago is already dying on you encourages people to go back into Apple stores. They go to rebuy or repair the same phone, see that the rebuy or repair is about the same price as just buying a new iPhone, and are willing to shell out about the $500 more to buy another iPhone. upgrade their phones consistently, is a huge incentive for people to continuously buy Apple products. It is the main thing that keeps people going back and buying new iPhones, and this would be a huge loss to Apple as a company if we were to if they were to change to a system of repairability, where people no longer have to rebuy an iPhone every single year because they can just repair the same one. And on top of this, they're also saying that like the change in direction of Apple as a company to one that is no longer like one of exclusivity would mean that they could lower their margins. They would be making less money off their iPhones, and less people would be buying iPhones year after year, which would lead to a huge hit in the profit margins of the company. Okay, so first off, why does Apple have a place as a luxury phone company, which is something that we stand by on our side of the house? Well, first off, the ability to have unique components is something that really sets Apple apart in the market, because they claim that they are better able to monitor the quality of these components, and these components are things that you cannot find in any other phone on the market. This is a huge draw for their customers, and it's something that keeps them coming back. When you say we use the same components as Samsung, as Google phone, people are turned off because they lose this illusion of exclusivity. They're less likely to buy iPhones above any other phone on the market, especially if it's a similar price. This other illusion of exclusivity does come with the software. A lot of people are used to using iPhones. They are not willing to change phones because they are used to using that same software. And also the software is the core reason why Apple is not friendly for gamers or developers, because it is like very specific to Apple. They are saying on site Affirmative that they would not be changing the software. We do not see how Apple would be any more appealing to gamers or developers who are not their core demographic, I'd like to point out. Their core demographic has always been like office workers and everyday people who want ease of accessibility in their everyday lives over the ability to like code a really complex game, right? So it's not their core demographic, and they would need to have a total overhaul of the software to change in this direction, and this is not something that would be viable or profitable for Apple. So moving on, and then furthermore, a lot of what is the core draw for a lot of Apple consumers? First off, we have like the ease of accessibility. They are used to the Apple products, and also there's a lot of hype around Apple and all the new releases. They would not be able to continuously pump out new releases at the rate they do if the phones were replaceable, if they were repairable, because people would not be willing to buy the iPhones year after year. It would take eyes off the market, and it would lead to a decrease in Apple's popularity as a brand, because less people are paying attention to the consistent new releases, because they're like, I've already got an iPhone that has worked for me for the past 5-10 years. I do not need to replace this one. What is the point of me going out and looking at the market and buying a new iPhone? iPhone kind of falls to the back of public consciousness, like a lot of companies like Android and Google that are vastly popular. They do not see the same amount of popularity as Apple, because they do not have this kind of constant overturning of rebuying of products from their consumers, right? And then furthermore, why is environmental friendliness not a huge concern for a lot of Apple consumers? Because the everyday person is more likely to prioritize convenience when buying products over the amount of and how environmentally friendly they're being. A lot of people will be willing to substitute plastic out of their lives because it's very simple for them, but a lot of people see iPhones as a necessity, and they wouldn't and they're not going to stop buying an iPhone just because they've been told by someone that it's not as environmentally friendly. On top of this, Apple said themselves that Apple are brilliant marketers, and they're great at kind of covering up these kind of more dodgy goings on in their company. Furthermore, also going forward, if they were to move towards more repairable components, if they were to do a complete overhaul of the company in the direction of one that would use standard components rather than their exclusive ones, first off, as I said before, it would break the illusion of exclusivity. They would not be able to ensure the quality of the components as much, because it would be more mass manufacturers, which means they would not be able to put these high price points on their iPhones, because people would be like, well, it's the same components in a Samsung and they're $500 less, so I'm not going to pay that high price point. So Apple would not, in fact, not be making as much money as they are at the moment of their phones. Also, it's a hugely costly and lengthy process to completely change suppliers. I'm sure Apple has a lot of deals with their current suppliers to get the increase in revenue, as F has suggested, which I have proven to you over the course of this speech, and I have proven to you at first, then it is not worth undergoing the huge process of like changing around all your suppliers, no matter how environmentally friendly it may be. Also on the current critique under the status quo of a lot of countries coming forward and saying we don't like your business practices, these countries have the impact on the market from these critiques has been negligible. Apple is still the leading supplier. This just goes to show that people don't really care about environmental friendliness. Also, a lot of countries do not want to lose Apple as a manufacturer in their country because it makes them a lot of money. Like, people buying iPhones is a huge boost to the economy. They're not going to boycott Apple. Like, the entirety of France is not going to boycott Apple because it's not environmentally friendly anymore. So the main hit to the market is the reduced frequency of renewals for an iPhone. That is the main business incentive, that is the main business model that iPhone has been using for years and years and years. Its consumers are used to it, its consumers are approving of it to a certain extent. People are willing to buy an iPhone because they are used to the interface, because they like the design of the phone, because they see it as a luxury product. Even if it is more breakable, they are just willing to put slap a case or an Apple certified screen protector on it and then go about their way. The general public, the general consumer base, has accepted this as the norm when it comes to buying cell phones, and they are willing to go forward to it. It's not a huge drawback for a lot of consumers. On top of this, Android phones are also pretty breakable in the current era. Just the way that phones are designed currently is just how people go about it. Also, people like iPhones because even though you have to go to their manufacturers, they have a pretty comprehensive insurance policy. But and also, so people are willing to put up with a lot of these drawbacks in order to pursue the perceived luxury of an iPhone, to continue pursuing the newer models. If they were able to repair their phones every single year, and they were able to keep their phones for 5, 10, 15 years because the software could just keep updating, there's less of an incentive to buy new phones, less people are going out and purchasing. iPhone loses a lot of money. Yes.
Thank you very much for that speech. And we'll now have the third speaker up to conclude this application side out. Thank you.
I think my speech will be very clearly three parts. I will look into three questions. The first is, what is Apple's core competence? And second is, do people care about Apple going green? And third is, which side has better impact in terms of purchasing? So first, what is Apple's core competence? I will do the weighing. I think on negative side, they generally tells us because Apple is a luxury brand, so that people buy it for hype and for fancy, so we shouldn't really do this thing to Apple. First thought is that, is Apple really a luxury brand? I think the second speaker from Affirmative side already told you a lot of things about how half of the population in this world is using Apple. How could that really be a luxury brand? But still, even if we admit that Apple is really a luxury brand, I think it explains why exactly we are on the side that gain more buyers and attract more people. Because generally, if it is a luxury brand, usually people who are buyers are rich and middle class, and these people who have more leisure time and have more incentive for these kind of things about sustainability. These people like to label themselves as someone who cares about environment or cares to do something good to this world and to this society that they live in. So I still think why we're not going to have more buyers and lose this core competence, we do the change. And secondly, I think even if we do this change of repairability, it doesn't mean the cost of each phone is going to be lower. If you buy the newest version of Apple after these policies, after this change, I still think it's going to be very highly costly. So it doesn't mean Apple no longer be a luxury brand which has a very high cost for paying the phones. And secondly, I think Apple still has its fancy and hype that because I don't think like after changing like those components of the phone means that you change the design of the phone. Apple is still going to look very fancy, and people like to hold an iPhone and to have an Apple on the MacBook that they use to show that, and also sit in the Starbucks. I think people still have this incentive to still buy Apple and still be attracted by Apple, even if something get changed. What really get changed, I think what really don't get changed and get maintained during this process is Apple's core quality. What we told you, I think Apple's core attraction is firstly about those design, and secondly about those entire software ecosystem, including iCloud, AirDrop, and unique set of applications like podcasts and etc. We think these are things are still going to exist and still going to attract a lot of customers, which are the real core competence of Apple, instead of whether this phone can be repaired or not. But whether this phone can be repaired or not is directly influencing users' experience of the phone. That we think that is matter to make the change. And also secondly, do people care about Apple actually going green? I think negative side only in contribution in this is like they tell us people don't care. People just want you to be very expensive and very fancy. Like to buy five phones and five that thing to charge the phone. People are happy to buy that. I don't think that is really true, because according to the infos, like we do hear, like there is already so much movements about people wanting Apple to make the change, and people wanting Apple to, just like other competitors, to allow these customers to do the repairing. And also we think this proves that common buyers also have the incentive to see the change, and people have this motivation to see and also allow for the change, like to go into and to buy the new phones probably. I think people generally no matter if they're rich or not, they also like to do something nice to this world and label themselves as, when I buy this phone, I'm actually doing something good, and also I'm not buying some phone that can only be a waste after 5 years. I think that's people's mentality. And also in this process, we prove to you like people care about Apple going green is more because Apple is a very smart brand. They are going to use a lot of advertisement and promotion and slogan to convince and let people know about this, and also that people care about this, and also that people respect Apple for doing so much things. I think Apple is smart enough to use also their budget to allow people to know their efforts, so that I think all of these process is going to be more cost benefit. And also lastly, I do think why this cannot be a good way for Apple to make innovation, because I think Apple already exhausts lots of their ideas, so that they can only use the change of camera design to attract new customers. Why can't they use this as a strategy for innovation and a strategy for attracting more customers and expansion of market? I do think in this we have the better impact level on telling you why going green is good and why people are going to care and why this is going to make change for the actor, which is Apple. But thirdly, I want to talk about the impact on both sides. I want to first look at negative side impact. I think negative side has two layers of impact. The first is last purchase, and second is costly shift. So first look at last purchase. I think they tell us last purchase because like people, when they know that they can repair their phone, they will start buying new phones. I think this is unclear when they tell us a lot of incentive and motivation of people, like people carrying Apple for the luxury brand, and they want to look fancy holding a new phone. So I don't think why in their world why in our world people are going to lose this same incentive to buy the new phone, to enjoy all the newest functions, or simply for fancy for showing off to their fans. Like I still think these purchasing are still going to exist in our world, even if we have this change. Like you can repair your phone. It doesn't mean like there will people stop buying new phones simply because they know they can repair the old phones. Probably they will send that old phone to their friends and family members. I think that would likely be the case. And also we are the team like negate you by telling you like it is not actually last purchase but more purchase, because now we can enter more market into Europe and into other countries or cities that are more care about environmental friendly policies and also environmental friendly products. So we think we tell you we have better purchase than negative side. But secondly, negative side tells about costly shift. We think even if it is true, like short term, in the short period, we're going to have these shifts throughout the entire eco industry. We think it's a worthy trade-off in comparison to a lot of benefits to the brand reputation and also competence and also profit for Apple in the long term. So on our side, we think we have given explanation how this is going to improve Apple's brand reputation. We tell you this is a signaling effect. When people know about like Apple is being sustainable, people generally having inside this going green trend, people will turn to support you and also have greater satisfaction of you. And also, I think in individual level, we also tell you why we have better brand reputation, because users get more satisfied with your product. Now they know, like, when they have only a very small problem with their phone, they can repair it. But when they have a really big problem, they may probably change it. I think generally users have better satisfaction on our side. How this all translates to profit? I think we tell you the reasons of profit going to driven in the long term, because suppliers, we can be diversified. If we are standardizing it, we'll lower the cost. And also on the market expansion, like not only just phone, but VR, AR projects can also be the industry that Apple can enter into. Proud to.
Thank you very much for that speech. We'll now have the third Neg speak up with the case side Neg. Here.
Two issues in this speech. Firstly, an issue on the framing of what Apple currently looks like under the status quo and in the comparative. And then the second issue about which side maximizes the most amount of profit, given the fact that is the shared most dominant issue in this debate between both sides on the practical material. So onto the framing issue. Okay, first of all, I want to clarify what I think is a systemic misunderstanding that negative side Affirmative has of our case. That is to say that they constantly push this idea on us that we are talking about the loss of customers, and they've made the comparative clash between whose sides, between which side retains the most amount of customers. The reason that this is a misunderstanding is because all the analysis we gave you at first and second was talking about why our side comparatively gets more renewals under the status quo. That is to say that even if the customer base stayed exactly the same with negligible change up or down, the amount of renewals and upgrades and overturning your current products is far higher under the status quo, as I'll analyze further and as a lot of mechanisms stood to say, comparative to what side Affirmative are going to be doing, in which each individual phone lasts longer and therefore less incentive to renew. That is like the clear framing we gave you as to our arguments. I think a lot of their analysis there becomes a lot weaker as a result. Then they gave us this characterization about ultimately Apple overall stagnating. We get several pieces of analysis. Firstly, they concede that we have phone dominance in the market under the status quo. Secondly, they talk about gaming and like PCs and MacBooks and stuff like that. And thirdly, VR. Okay, on this, I think that the framing they just gave us there was basically the status quo with no extra strategic benefits for their side here. Because firstly, they concede that we dominate on phones already. Secondly, they've missed the fact that we've never been a company that has attempted to win on the gaming PC type market. Yani told you this. We don't seek to beat Windows. We never have. That has never been a realistic goal of Apple, because we focus on Macs being very we literally call Macs like the MacBook Air. We want them to seem really luxurious. We want them to seem really, really exclusive, so that people get a comfortable feel and a nice feel from them. I think that also VR was just indicative of the fact that Apple is expanding under the status quo that we are defending. I think that is already proof that we are expanding into new areas and innovating already under the status quo. I don't think this was very strategic of them to characterize. They also tell us that we are ultimately stagnating in the form of new innovations, and this was a mechanism to fix that. I think it does not matter at the point that we prove to you that we get higher profit margins and we actually succeed on Apple's interest in this debate, which I'm going to do to you right now. Okay, onto that issue about who makes new profit. Let's go through some mechanisms they gave us to try to damage our case. Firstly, they were trying to characterize the market as very oversaturated. Again, we characterize to you that it is a debate about constant renewal, because that is Apple's current business incentive, constant upgrades to existing customers so they stay loyal. We characterize to you very clearly that Apple has a very fanatic fan base based on a literal culture surrounding the love of Apple and iOS that Paddy told you about. Okay. First of all, they tell us about in their side they get more downstream suppliers, meaning they don't outsource and they get more choice. Firstly, this was completely asserted at the start of the debate. There was no analysis as to why this was something they got in their world. There was no link between the mechanism and the outcome there. And I also think that ultimately in their world it was going to be even worse for suppliers, because when we change those suppliers, we have to then go through the process of locating them, negotiating deals with them, distributing those resources. Yani gave you plenty of characterization as to how costly and difficult, Paddy and Yani gave you characterization as to how costly and difficult that process is, and I think that burdens Apple's ability to make profit into the future in the worst case scenario, and in the best case scenario causes significant delays in our product distribution. Then we go on to the environment issue. They tell us there's this new trend of environmentalism as per the topic slide, therefore they capitalize on that. Firstly, people need phones so much as because it's so integral to their lives, as we told you, that ultimately this is often a backseat consideration. We think secondly, they also concede the constant purchase habit under the status quo. There was a massive tension inside Affirmative's case, where they concede that we are like the dominant phone company in the world. Everyone is addicted to buying our phones, but everyone doesn't like buying our phones because we're not sustainable. If this characterization were true, clearly everyone is just virtue signaling and just buying the phones anyway. I think that the characterization we gave you stands there. Thirdly, people love luxury, as we told you at first and second. Therefore, people prefer the fine feeling and the comfortable feeling and like the use of iPhone in the store. It is really marketed very appealingly, as the side Affirmative has conceded to you. And I think that feeling overrides the sense of, oh my god, it's a bit damaging to the environment, to the average consumer. Then third tells us like ultimately there is a movement here. I think the coexistence of a movement that wants this and the current market trend that Affirmative have conceded to us, in which we are dominant, we are booming, everyone is buying our phones constantly, means that ultimately the info slide is just revealing that there is a minority demand for it. And ultimately that minority demand doesn't really matter because they're very small, they're not going to have that much of an impact on our profit margins. Then they tell us that Apple's going to use this as incredibly smart propaganda. Ultimately, we tell you people do not factor in the environment into their calculus for several more reasons. Firstly, I think they also concede that we already cover up these things well. Like the marketing Apple does with all the flashy videos and stuff like that is usually pretty effective in making people forget about those things and just buy it anyway, because people's own selfish comfort is often what they prioritize in the first place. I don't even think they give us a unique benefit in the comparative here, and I think second concedes the convenience. And Yani tells you that people love the convenience, and that's why people come back. And ultimately, I think that is what underpins the luxury element of here, and why we just have a market domination under the status quo. They tell us that the cost is going to come down by it being standardized. I think one, this is not exclusive to their world. That is to say, in our world, things are still standardized. They're just standardized to be breakable. In their world, they're just standardized to be not breakable. I don't think this was a unique mechanism that advanced them anywhere and still fell under the issue of characterization. They tell us that it's going to be more developer-friendly. Again, there was no reason why a developer-friendly environment was more exclusive to a phone simply being less breakable. I think that iOS, as we characterize, is pretty user-friendly, and that's why the average person loves it, and I don't think this changes in a world in which the phones are still breakable. So what do we get from third? They tell us that they talk about luxury and link it to the environment. I think that first of all, they can see that the number one market base, it loves green stuff and loves being environmentally friendly, but we still capture most of their purchases under the status quo. They tell us that loads of the middle class and loads of the upper class who love to virtue signal about the environment, love that type of stuff, but then can see that we already have their market share. So I don't see how they get the unique benefit of expanding into that market base, as we already don't do with our incredibly amazing marketing that side Affirmative conceded that we have. I think there's little mechanization and how the costs actually stay down in their world at the end of this debate, comparative to our mechanisms that they gave you. I think that ultimately, at the end of the speech, we need to weigh several considerations. I think firstly, we are profit motivated, we want the most amount of profit. I've already taken down most of their mechanisms about how they minimize the price. And even in the best case scenario, that they still encapsulate a massive amount, a new market because of environmental friendliness. They've given no reasons why that slightly expanded market would be enough to be comparatively still higher profit margins than the solid mechanisms we've given you about how the individual phone becomes so much more expensive, how the actual operations in the factory become so much more expensive, the actual overhaul of our procedures and what we do with the phones becomes so much more expensive. That is literally the antithesis of what a business wants. We want to minimize cost per unit, and as a result, I think that side negative ultimately delivers a cheaper product for Apple to make and far more profit. So I think ultimately, at the point in this debate that there was a massive tension in which they simultaneously concede that the environmentally friendly market are going to promote a change, but we also already have the environmentally friendly market. I don't think they get many benefits on their most poignant path to victory on environmentalism, and I think most of their mechanisms about how they lower cost production were asserted anyway in the debate. I'm extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We now move to the reply portion of the debate. Speaking time to hard, speaking orders reversed. I'd like to invite therefore back the negative leader to deliver the negative leader's reply. Here.
issues within this debate. Firstly, on profitability and who's able to generate the most amount of profit, and secondly, on competition and domination of the market, right? Okay, so I think generally both teams relatively agreed that the interests in Apple within this debate are both having the greatest degree of profit and then also having the greatest degree of the market. Okay, so firstly, on profitability. I think the main pushes from the affirmative team is that they are able to guarantee cheaper products that are more appealing to a larger amount of the public, and because they are using more easier, cheaper parts or more common parts, that they will get considerably more. It would be considerably cheaper to create these products, and that more people will, as a result, be able to buy them because Apple will decrease the prices of products. I think we respond telling you firstly that there's probably going to be some degree of lag as far as these changes in prices, but also that there are several reasons as to why there would not be these necessarily more customers overall. At least if not more customers, there wouldn't be more sales. We told you that when customers are less likely to go into Apple stores, they are less likely to interface with the company directly, they are less likely to see new products, buy new products as a result, and that ultimately, in most instances, customers are less likely to purchase new Apple products if they can get them fixed in some capacity by some independent person. So ultimately, this would result in people buying less Apple products as a result, because they had less of a requirement to do that, and ultimately that would always mean that Apple was able to generate less profit as a result, because they had less capacity to sell new products to their customers as a result. Whether that's because customers were less aware of these products, whether that's because customers were less likely to directly interface with the company as they are required to under status quo, that always meant that we were able to generate a greater degree of profit when customers had a higher likelihood to interface with the company directly. Okay, so secondly, on market share. I think we hear a lot from the affirmative team. I think the best push is that customers are unlikely to leave Apple within this. I think two biggest pushes. Firstly, that customers are unlikely to leave Apple because of reliance on cloud services. I would say that the affirmative team asserted this. It's unclear how important cloud services are to customers. I think it wasn't really substantiated whether or not many people use these services. But I think also the affirmative team already concedes that millions of people, I think they said about half of the world's population, actively use Apple products under the status quo. So I think they needed to prove that for some reason this shift would actively incentivize more people to engage in Apple that otherwise would not have engaged with it in the same capacity going forward. I think we told you that because of the drastic brand shift in marketing, Apple no longer being able to necessarily market themselves as a unique brand, as they were always going to be more comparable to their competitors and less able to carve out their own niche within the market. It was going to be much harder for them to keep a hold on the market share that they currently have under status quo. Because side affirmative was unable to generate more profit and they were unable to maintain or improve the market share that Apple holds, they were unable to win this debate. Perhaps in game.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to invite back the negative leader to deliver the last speech of the affirmative case, the last speech of today's debate, the last speech of the in-rounds of Austral 2023. Here.
Yeah, cool. So this is the last 4 minutes. So I tried to make it funny, but after I finished writing my speech, I found out it's not that funny. So please bear with me for the last 4 minutes. Okay, cool. With that being said, my speech starts in 3, 2, 1, now. I myself use Apple iPad, but I always forgot to bring its original charger. This is the reason why I constantly lose out of battery in a lot of places, and I just hate this. Okay, firstly, I want to deal with their point about luxury. I think the point about luxury is the point is, like, it is much more about the branding name. It is about that when you're using Apple products, this brings you the sign of social status. This brings you the kind of like you're using some kind of luxury products. I don't think it has huge relation with what kinds of components that Apple products are using. I think it is much more about the branding name. As long as you're using Apple products, this leads to like some kind of like so-called luxury, right? So I honestly don't understand why this is going to be becoming their winning case, and I think it's quite vague for me to imagine that people suddenly hate you when you go green. I think this is just untrue because like it is for like average informed global citizen, it is epistemically true that when we're going green, this is generally a good thing. And I think it actually don't influence its own functions. So I think it is quite vague for us to imagine why they are going to lose a lot of customers when they're going green, right? Okay, then I'm going to deal with their claim about reselling leads to more profits. I think firstly, this is a parallel claim because I think the problem is if you prove that reselling oftentimes leads to like profit, I think reselling also happen on our side because one, like generally when you after like 5 years or 4 years you're going to change your phones, right? And if that it is the case that you just like people like to buy new products, buy the pursue the latest version, then I think it is equally likely on our side that you're still going to buy the latest products. I don't see why this is not going to happen on our side. But also, crucially, we point out that the repairment profit is probably very small for Apple, but it is huge for individuals, which means that on our side, this is going to lead to even more renewal because the fact that this is generally going to lead to much more affordable products to begin with. So a lot more customers will choose to continuously buy new Apple products, right? And also, we would argue those original customers still choose to like buy Apple products because of the fact that so-called loyalty, they like their products and using all the mechanisms that give us, I think this is just true. Finally, about the weight, I think the point is about which side can actually help Apple win more customers, right? I think the problem is that they're only claiming that there are some group of people who will choose to like give up using Apple products, but our claim is that a lot of potential users don't choose to use Apple products in the first place. This means two things. One, for those people who are already like very loyal customers to those Apple products, I think because of the fact that this is you are proud of using iPhones, you are proud of using this as a sign of your social status. So this means that you're still very likely to choose to use Apple products. And because of the fact that user have because of user habits, which means that you may probably very like the ecosystem, you like iCloud, something like that, which means that it is very less likely for those original customers to suddenly shift their consumer habits, right? So it is very unclear how big the margin, how big the proportion of customers on our side we're going to lose, right? But comparatively, we would argue we're actually bringing much more new potential customers. They are shifting the weight on their side when they're doing this choice simply because of the fact that they, like a lot of things are not eco-friendly. Their claim is that people don't care about environment, but I think those people are actually symmetric. If they don't care about environment, then on our side they're still continuously purchasing iPhones because it doesn't influence anything, right? They like Apple products, they still purchase. But there are just a crucial swing base, a lot of crucial swing customers that is going to choose to buy Apple products on our side. So we still win on the number. Based on that, very proud to stand on affirmative side.